Welcome all to another episode of the Breakout Room, where we explore diversity, equity, and inclusion and environmental impact from a number of different angles within the startup ecosystem. And I'd like to welcome today an amazing woman, Reshika Dhir, who is a patent agent and a lawyer and partner at Bergstein and Parr, and has had a number of different startup support and advisor positions at a number of different universities and accelerator and incubators. Reshika, if you turn on your camera, please join us today. Thank you so much for being here. I am just in awe of your all these things. I'm going down a list of all the things that you're doing right now as a startup advisor for Ella Women at York University, Venture Lab, Edge at Sheridan, iCube at University of Toronto, Mississauga. I was part of University of Toronto, Mississauga iCube a number of years ago, and I won third prize for their pitch competition at that point.
Oh, wow. Congrats.
I know, thank you. I've been at all different levels of within the startup ecosystem. Shad Canada and Osgood Hall, and we actually came to meet through a newer organization called Elec. So welcome, Reshika. I can't wait to hear about your lens and to delve a little bit more into how diversity, equity, inclusion, and the environmental impact should be dealt with from the intellectual property level. Welcome, and can you just give us a little bit of a brief introduction of yourself and all these wonderful organizations that you're a part of? Tell
Absolutely.
us about
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me here, Cindy. It's a pleasure. So I will, I guess, start my journey or telling you about my journey from my undergrad days, I suppose. So I'm an electrical engineer by background. I, graduated from engineering, did work in the field for a little bit, and very quickly decided that I love fast-paced life and for my own good, I guess. So now I am an intellectual property lawyer. So after engineering, went into law school, went to Osgood Hall, went into law school with the intention of becoming a lawyer. Whether it was going to be IP or not was up in the air. But I'm really glad that I am doing what I'm doing, because one, huge fulfilling feature of my job is just that constant learning that comes my way. Like, I never feel that I know it all. I'm an engineer. I should be able to solve all the problems in the world. No way. I'm learning all the time. So as an IP lawyer, what I primarily focus on is patents, which, as many of you may already know, are these, IP generally are these, intangible bundle of rights that help you protect your creations, and patents in particular protect your inventions, how things work, what they're made of, what system or processes underlie those inventions. I deal with startups, really a whole gamut of clientele, but a lot of my work happens with startups and small to medium-sized enterprises. We also have some clients who are universities, some more established clients as well. But it's always a lot more fun dealing with the sort of startups and SMEs, because they ask you some really good questions. It kind of leads you to scratch your head and go, I love the fact pattern you've just explained to me. Now, how can I help you to the best of my abilities and in a cost-effective manner? Because budget is a huge concern. And sort of back to in the patent world, I focus on prosecution, which is the whole process of obtaining patent rights for the clients. So that's me dealing with the inventors, dealing with the CEOs or the decision makers, the business people, trying to understand how invention works and what the business goals are sort of down the line, looking out 5 to 10 years, and then making sure that we put the right fences and the right kind of protection around those assets, which then the companies can use to commercialize and maybe generate a revenue stream and benefit from it. In terms of my involvement with all of these different amazing accelerators and incubators and universities, it all started partly because I wanted to give back to the community. So the IP bar is a small bar. There's not a whole lot of patent agents and lawyers. I mean, there's quite a few, but still, it's a very nice, cozy sort of family-wide. There's and so you're seeing kind of the same people over and over again, and it's been very kind to me. So I wanted to sort of pay back to the best of my abilities, which kind of turn into my involvement with all of these different incubators. And I deal with startups at these incubators. Some of the startups are very, very early stages. They just have an idea and they just don't know what to do with it because they don't come from the technical background sometimes, or they're quick to criticize their own ideas, sadly, and that happens a lot. So we do a lot of sort of IP awareness presentations, office hours, sort of free consultations for these companies, just so we can nudge them in the right direction and kind of make sure they're going forward and not getting sort of inundated with all of the self-doubts and questions and lack of awareness about IP and losing themselves along the way. So that's kind of really, if I have kind of meet some connections for the startups or kind of move them in the right forward-facing direction. So now at least they're going into their startup or their venture in a more aware manner, and they know what their IP is, what the risks are of not protecting that IP, but all of that's happening more consciously, then I feel like I've done my job really well. So yeah, I mean, there's another wonderful organization, Ella, which I have had the pleasure of supporting and helping out the female founders at that organization. That organization specifically helps female founders. It gives them network training, getting experts in IP or accounting or business, and come and talk to these women. And again, just make sure that some of these underrepresented, population that's got brilliant ideas and great capabilities and amazing people who can think through so many different lenses, they're just not getting the right kind of support. Unfortunately, sometimes. So having institutions or like organizations like Ella, where the focus is on these women and nudging them in the right direction, has been very important. It's been very fulfilling for me. And then I do a lot of sort of legal speaking at IP, like on IP at different universities. And some universities have some IP support that they provide to startups as well. So there's a wonderful clinic that's being run at Osgoode Hall by IP Osgoode students there. It's called Innovation Clinic, and there it's almost free service. It's very nominal fee service that's very meaningful to certain startups that are just starting out and you just want to kind of know what the landscape looks like and whether they have something inventive or not. So yeah, all of these sort of support back to the community and a little bit of educational awareness things that I'm doing it really makes my day job really interesting and gives me a sense of fulfillment as well. So I will stop there. They're going to talk for a long time. But...
I mean, at the same time as protecting founders and putting up those moats and fences, we're looking at tearing down fences from an accessibility standpoint. So it's kind of a wonderful visual that we're kind of putting together. And I had the pleasure of working with Osgoode when they were first starting out. So to watch how they've kind of evolved, and I've recommended them to all sorts of founders from all walks of life that didn't think they had almost the right to be able to protect their ideas. And I think that that's something that we really have to unpack, and IPIC is doing a lot to really kind of change that direction, change that narrative, because when we talk about when we talk about IP and intellectual property, first of all, we don't understand all the different aspects of it, right? We automatically go to patents and we automatically think, okay, that's everything. We understand a little bit about what trademark,
Trademarks, yeah.
all those other aspects are, but we don't realize that that's all the same package. And that, I think that's the wonderful thing, having been a little bit through the Osgood program, is that you've got these articling students who are really embracing what you're doing, and they're learning at the same time as you're learning, and you don't feel like you're asking silly questions. And it's a
Yes.
wonderfully welcome environment. So we will leave those in the show notes. A wonderful place to go. Do you know if Osgood is limited to Canadians, or is it something that can be explored from an international level as well? Because we do have an
Yeah.
international audience.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, no, I think it's so we've been involved with the clinic as a firm for about 5 years, and personally 5 to 7 years. And personally, I've been involved for all of those years. And most of our clients have been Canadian, and part of that may be because it's kind of even though it's been in existence 7 years, it has evolved over the years. And in the last few years, it's really come to its own. Like everybody's fully trained, even though they're students. We go in and do some prior art search training. They've even drafted, these fellows or students have drafted a few applications as well, but it's gaining traction really fast. And I don't see why a foreign company who is interested in just getting a prior art search done to see whether they have something inventive or not, or who's interested in Canadian market specifically for trademark protection, for example. There shouldn't be any barrier for access to them. I think it's, I'm just trying to see if I've had a client who's foreign trained. I can't think of one, or who's foreign based, but I think of one, but I don't think that would be a barrier, because the good news about IP is, or one of the, at least on the patent side, for example, one of the requirements is in order for you to be able to get a patent protection for your invention, it has to be new or one of its kind in the world, right? It's even if you are only filing something in Canada or just in the US, it has to be novel in terms of the world. So anybody who's doing a prior art search is going to look at publicly available databases to see what else has been, similar things have been invented elsewhere in the world. So whether you do that search in Canada or do it in the US, the search is the same, and anybody who's competent should be able to do a good job at it. So from that perspective, there shouldn't be an issue.
And I think that that's the biggest thing, is that this should be something welcoming. We want to encourage more people to ask questions about IP. You don't have to pay to ask questions and to have to find out about more about IP. And there's these wonderful organizations. If you do have links to a university or college like the Edge or iCube or Venture Lab, by all means reach out to them. Founder Institute, Y Combinator, all of them as well are great environments to be supportive around building and understanding your IP. Now, questions that I wanted to kind of go into a little bit more is, as we start building up that moat or that fence around our IP, what opportunity is available for as we start to build out the different lenses? So if we're building a product and we're now including how somebody with perhaps that is visually impaired might use our product uniquely, how do these different, or somebody who is hearing impaired, or a woman because we're ergonomically built differently, or a woman of color, for example, if you have a cardio health platform, race also plays a strong aspect in how that IP works and is used, right? So how do these different lenses then play out, or could play out, or should play out in terms of being able to protect or even differentiate from the stuff that's out there? How does present opportunity?
No, that's a great question. I'm thinking about it from the perspective of sort of the legal side of things when it comes to IP world or patent law, for example. The good news about, and this is often a misunderstood point, I think, is what people think that, if somebody has a patent on a drinking cup, how can anybody else come and disrupt that world? Like, and what happens to people subsequently who come and maybe, wait on that drinking cup with a new material or two handles instead of a single handle, adding all of these extra benefits to to an invention that's already protected. Can they get patent for their creations or their improvements on it or not? And I find in my interactions with the startups, that's often a misunderstood point, because people start thinking, oh, well, if somebody has a patent on the broader idea of a cup, drinking cup, I can't improve on it. I can't protect my own idea. Like, why do I even bother? The good news here is that about 90% of the patent applications in the US, for example, are filed for improvements over existing technologies. Okay, so for invention to be patentable, one of the things is it has to be new in the world, but it also has to be something inventive or a non-obvious improvement over something else. Now, when we're talking about some of these challenges, as you mentioned, is, men and women sort of operate differently sometimes, and they have different preferences. And there was a funny, I guess it's not that funny, actually, it's very serious. There's a couple anecdotes that come to mind is, one I think article I was reading was if a female designed a car, then for sure they were going to put a placeholder for their purse. Because right now you have to put your purse on the floor, but people don't want to do that with their fancy purses. So there's got to be, like, why is there not a placeholder to put your purse there? So point being, if there are existing cars and internal designs to some of these items, somebody comes along and it's not serving their purpose. There are certain disadvantages in that product or invention that perhaps you are disadvantaged because you are differently abled, or you are a different gender, or you are different, you have different preferences, you want to see improvements. Well, good news is it is possible to get some sort of protection around these improvements, and you could yourself get a patent for the improved design, for example, or patent or industrial design, or any of these buckets of IP, perhaps under for a an improvement that you have thought about, which has a certain advantage, which is going to have a business value, and it's going to resonate with a certain group of individuals. So yeah, I mean, that's huge. And I think the other side of it is, I think one of the reasons why a lot of people they shy away from IP is partly because it's complex. It's hard to understand. I mean, it could be hard to understand if you're trying to conquer it sort of on your own. But as we just indicated, there's so much help and support available that people should certainly go out and try and leverage all of these almost free resources that are out there, and try and demystify some of the the different lingo involved in IP and the different bundles of rights, because at the end of the day, it is critical, and it's very important to take care of your intellectual assets, because it doesn't take too long from your first disclosure or disclosure to a VC or somebody who you thought it's safe, it's with one other person, what can go wrong? And next thing you know, now you can't get IP for some of the things you've already disclosed legally, because you have to have premature public disclosure of your ideas. Can sort of invalidate your patents that you file subsequently, or even jeopardize your ability to get patents in the first place, for example.
That's a really important thing. I think we should probably highlight a little bit more about what that means, because there are a lot of people that jump the gun and they're excited, and at the same time we're getting advice as we're building out our program. Don't be shy about sharing your idea, get it out there, tell everybody about it, but that's not necessarily the right path. So let's unpack that a little bit more, because I think that will help protect founders. What does it mean to talk about your idea while at the same time protecting your intellectual property?
Yeah, it's a very fine line and a very challenging position to be in for any startup. And I can completely sympathize with folks who feel pressure to talk about their ideas or who think that there's nothing wrong with doing so. So when I talk about public disclosure of ideas, we're talking about you disclosing your invention in such a way that any person who is skilled in that field is able to recreate it. So if you have just kind of highlighted at a very high level, here's a problem I'm trying to solve. Let's go back to the drinking cups, for example. Indulge me a little bit. Let's assume we live in a world where only cups without handles existed. Now, somebody came along and their brilliant idea was, well, if you put hot beverage in that cup without handle and you hold the cup, your hands are going to burn, right? So why don't we put an offset handle? So that helps with heat dissipation and it doesn't affect your hand as much when you put hot beverage in it. Oh, great. Now, this person has come up with a real problem that they're trying to solve, but they're co-developing the idea with somebody, or they want to feel out if their idea is going to work out or not. They want to, see if there's traction. They're going to probably ask a couple of potential customers to see, would you buy a cup with a handle? Because you're probably not used to seeing it. Would that be odd or weird, or would you be interested in a product like that? Or when they go to raise funds, right? Pitch competitions, common, a place where people have to talk about their sort of ideas and whatnot. Anytime you're talking to any kind of source of capital, they're going to want to know what exactly they're investing in. So that's where if you give away kind of the secret sauce, which is, hey, I've come up with this great idea, which is adding a handle to my cup. Well, there is your idea. That it's out there now. So now if you try and file a patent application, well, unfortunately, in some countries like Europe, if you have disclosed this idea, it could be a verbal, by the way, oral disclosure could be in writing, it could be a poster, it could be anything that will enable somebody who's skilled in the cup manufacturing to recreate the idea. Well, then in Europe, you can't file a patent application for this. Well, you shouldn't. Even if you try to do it, it can get invalidated down the line because somebody can say, oh, listen, on this pitch competition, which was, published or which happened before the application was filed, this idea was already disclosed. So this patent's invalid, and lo and behold, it will be invalidated. Now, good news in some countries like US and Canada is that you get a grace period from your first public disclosure. So you've disclosed the idea today at a pitch competition, for example, you buy yourself 1 year. And in that 1 year, you have to file your patent application so as to avoid an instance where your application can be invalidated. And mind you, all of these disclosures that I'm talking about, we're talking about disclosures not under an obligation of confidentiality. Now, one way to protect yourself is, well, one obvious way, and the way that I think is foolproof to protect yourself is as soon as you have an idea, you will do some R&D in a sort of closed loop. And if you are talking to other people, make sure you have NDAs signed, and we'll circle back to NDAs in a minute because they could be problematic too. But get a application filed, like a provisional. We're not going to get into all the different types, but there is a way to get something on the file in the patent office, and then any disclosure you have after that filing is you are safe. You can disclose that, your application won't get invalidated. Now, the other way is, as I said before, you can get NDAs signed by people who you are presenting those ideas to. Which could be very difficult, as we can all imagine. If you're at a pitch competition and there's like, who knows who's going to, I guess it would be better, maybe easier if it was in person, but now everything is on Zoom or whatever. Who knows who's listening to you? And there's no way people are going to just sign away their, rights and sign these agreements and contracts. So it gets very difficult to get NDA signed. And even if you get those signed, the worst case scenario would be the person you signed the NDA with, they still use that idea, or they start disclosing it, or they start profiting from that idea. You can only go after them for breach of contract. You can't go after them for damages that may have been caused to you because you couldn't get a patent protection around your idea. Right. And that protection, by the way, is 20 years of protection, which could be very substantial if you started monetizing on it. So all of that lost revenue is not something you can easily sue somebody else for when all they have done is breached a contract. So it is a very difficult path to walk, but I guess some of the things you can do is when you're disclosing your idea, do it at a high level, which may be difficult for some areas of technology, like mechanical ideas, because it is a mechanical piece. It's a handle that you kind of have to show to kind of prove to people that this product works for its intended purpose. But to the extent you can avoid that and keep your discussion at a high level, that's highly, highly recommended. But yeah, this is a real problem that people ignore but should be aware of. Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that we really do need to change that dynamic. There are so few founders, underrepresented or not, that do their due diligence on the investors, right? And there is a different way to present, and make sure that you know that the investors that you're sharing information with are truly the ones that you either want to date, which I call the B-level investors, or want to marry the A-level investors that are perfect fit. Understanding that those A-level investors are going to last, especially at that seed level or that first early round, your pre-seed or seed, they're going to, that relationship is going to last longer than most co-founder relationships and most American marriages, North American marriages. So make sure that you do your due diligence on the investor just as much as they're doing the due diligence on you. And that due diligence there is also a way to protect, right? Because you're putting all of this information, your patents, all the work that you've done to protect your moat information or your fence into a protected Dropbox, or I think that's a Dropbox type of environment that it's protected, and they have to have a key in order to get it. And then when you're talking from a pitch standpoint at a public multi-company pitch competition, expose the information that revolves around the problem and solution as opposed to your sales pitch, because the sales pitch is not protected, but the solution is a lot more emotional than perhaps, here's my product and this is what it can do. And I think that might be an interesting way to kind of build a moat around your moat.
Yeah, no, I think, we say this all the time with contracts, is the contract is only as good as the person signing it. So I couldn't agree more with the sort of dating analogy. You have to really pay attention. Don't just run for the capital. I know it's very tempting to take it all in and just, even if sometimes means diluting your rights in your own company, which is a whole other problem. There's also a whole lack of awareness generally, I find, from when I'm dealing with startups. So just on the financial side of things, like what they're agreeing to when they're signing all these agreements. Yeah. So which is even, away from sort of far away from IP discussions, although it's kind of related, it's all about business valuations. But yeah, you have to think carefully about who's listening to you, who you're sharing ideas with. I mean, what are they capable of? What kind of reputation they have? And can your idea be somebody else's idea because they have the funds for it and they have maybe the resources to run with it? And I know it sounds really negative, but unfortunately, you have to do your best to protect what's yours. And people are not generally just nice, especially if you have a winning idea that can be, that's, revolutionary or something. You have to take extra steps to protect it. And one of the things I tell the startups, and again, especially the underrepresented part of the population, is do not be too quick to sort of criticize your own ideas. One of the things I hear oftentimes from our sort of inventors and creators is, well, how can this be inventive or patented? Because it took me like 2 weeks to come up with this idea. It was so easy for me, how can I get a patent for it? Oh, well, that's not what the law says. Law doesn't say how long it took you to come up with the idea or how hard it was for you. You were really smart, acknowledge that. But talk to a professional, or, talk to somebody before you dismiss your ideas and just start throwing away or freely donating your ideas effectively to the world. So,
and that's the perspective and the protection that we need to provide, is to understand that differently represented founders for whatever we might be, we navigate the startup process very differently than is advertised. As an example, women actually tend to bootstrap their company for a minimum of 3 years, which means they've self-funded. They've proven that their idea is work and is of value. So that's one piece where you have to go. Oh, and another part, and this is, I'd like to unpack this a bit in the IP world, but women tend to be asked preventative questions rather than promotional questions. And that's in a lot of environments, in the business environment in general. So as an example, in the startup ecosystem with investors, we're asked questions like, this is a saturated market. How are you ever going to compete? I know this, I've recently talked to this startup and 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 this startup, and they're all doing the same thing. How are you ever going to compete? Knowing that we're getting this preventative question, it's not a matter of going on the defensive and saying, oh, well, we're competing in this way and this way. It's about approaching it from a promotional response to say, are you asking about my go-to-market strategy? So with
Yeah.
that analogy, how can we change the narrative and make these underrepresented founders feel more confident and change the narrative when they approach intellectual property to be more promotional rather than preventative and protective?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that's a, real challenge, a real struggle. I think you're right. I mean, there's been many studies on this and data on this. And one thing that I always have to keep reminding myself when I am ever doubting my own abilities is, well, if there's a job posting, women are going to make sure they check off like, if possible, 110% of the boxes. Whereas men are like 50%, I will get this job. I'm qualified. I'll learn on the job, right? Like you've heard this before. So you kind of have to, I don't, it sounds really wrong to say, well, think like a man, but I think you have to just have faith in your own abilities and confidence. And one way you can do that is, I am a person who loves stats and data. I want to know data so I can be confident that what I'm thinking is backed up, and I can then show it to other people and sort of prove my point. And so I think, when you're working on something as a startup, you have an idea. It could be a sort of a very technological intensive idea or a softer high impact idea. Try to find out what is the sort of USP of your idea. Why, like, it is a valid question. Why would people come after your product? Why would they be interested in that? How does it differentiate from everything else that already exists out there? So doing a little bit of homework, and IP, by the way, is not just about protecting your ideas and then fighting things out in court, but just patents, the sheer number of patents that have been filed worldwide. If this world were ever to end, using just the knowledge from the patent databases, everything that's worth recreating in this world can be recreated because there's so much information in these patent documents. One of the requirements for filing a patent application is that you have to disclose how your invention works in sufficient detail so that when the patent expires, people can recreate it. And the reason why I point that out is that you can do some searches or landscape analysis, just to find out what kind of your portfolio of your competitor looks like, for example, or what other similar areas of similar technologies are out there. And you can do some competitive analysis or differentiating between what you find and what you have to offer to have that golden nugget. That this is why it could be your amazing brand, it could be your use of green technology or clean tech, it could be just a different way of doing something that people have been doing inefficiently for the longest time. It could be solving a new problem, but whatever it is that you've thought about, for you to have faith in it, maybe do some sort of competitive analysis to see what differentiates you, and confidently go out there and brag about it, right? And unfortunately, the questions from angel investors, VC, especially if they're a certain demographic, you can't avoid it. There's been questions asked of people, like I hear stories all the time, like, well, what if you get pregnant? Like, who's going to run the company? Like, what?
But that's the thing, is that they are not the right investors for you. So you
Yeah,
don't feel obligated to answer those questions. And it's not about thinking like a man, it's about thinking about things from your lens and then approaching it in a different way that's unique to you. And I want to just unpack the and I apologize, I don't know the statistic off the top of my head, but a lot of co-founder relationships where there is a male and a female co-founder, and just run a little stat here. So if you do have so female funded companies only have about 2% of the funding available, and that dropped with the pandemic down from 3 to 4%. Women of color only get 0.03%. If you add in a male co-founder into that environment, it jumps up about 10 to 12%. Okay. So now you've got these co-founder relationships where you have the historically dominant male co-founder who may have just come in, and I'm watching this all the time, where it's a female founder who has had the idea, has run with the idea, gets to a point where we all do, where you realize, okay, my skills are off, are one side, and I need to bring in that other side of skills. Everything has been developed up to that point on their own. They bring in a male co-founder who comes in, has the idea because they've done the IP thing. I will handle this for you. And then grabs the IP. It is now his IP. So how do we avoid and protect female founders or underrepresented founders? Because it's not just female founders. So you might have a founder with a disability that feels that they don't have the right, or they don't have the knowledge, or they won't be heard if they go after this IP themselves. And I do want to kind of stress back to like Ella and Osgood Hall, the Innovation Clinic, that these are great places to kind of start to ask your questions. But Reshika, what do you think from that standpoint?
Yeah, I think it's very important to know what, as a female founder, before you start adding co-founders to the mix, especially those who don't hesitate from taking all the credit and doing none of the work. Very important to know exactly who owns what. So an interesting, I'm going back to patents again, because it's very interesting and often again confused item as well, is for a patent application, you have to identify who the inventor is. There are two different concepts: inventorship and ownership. The owner can be the company ultimately, but the inventor is the person who actually put in the effort to come up with the problem, to actually put a solution in place, and to make sure that solution works. So they're the ones who did the innovating. Their name has to be there. And by the way, in most cases, they're the first owners of that IP as well, of that patent. So, and their name has to be mentioned in a patent application. Once again, incorrectly naming inventors you can invalidate your patent. So, and I'm not saying not every case is not going to turn into a patent application, but just keeping that concept in mind is the fact that if you created something, it is your IP. Now, if you're bringing a sort of a co-owner on board or something, you gotta make sure that you decide how you want to distribute the ownership rights in that IP. Don't just give it all away. And agreements, some kind of licensing arrangement, or assigning part of the rights, not all of the rights, like those kind of things need to be thought out and discussed, with a professional who can guide you in the right way. And 100, like what I've and I guess be comfortable as a sort of female founder. I have some female clients, and I find that one of the things that some female clients who are doing a wonderful job at this is they're comfortable with being uncomfortable, because they know if there are things that they don't know about, they can either hire somebody or bring somebody on the team to tackle one like that specific problem, or they're going to learn. Fast learners, they're going to try and figure things out on their own sometimes as well. And they're really good at reading people as well. I find they're good at knowing who to trust, who not to trust, and build those relationships that way. But they're comfortable in saying, well, I don't know this, but it's not scaring me. I'm going to find out more about it. I'm just going to be uncomfortable for a little bit till I learn and I become comfortable again. So I think having maybe that sort of attitude goes a long way. Because I mean, I've been working as a patent agent, a patent lawyer for 10 years, and there are things that cross my desk too that, sometimes they're like, I don't know what to do with it. So you can either just freeze up and feel like, oh, I can't handle this. Like, what do I do now? And just fret about it, or just be like, okay, I'm going to learn this. It'll be a couple of hard weeks, but then we're going to get to a point where this is not going to be an issue anymore. So perhaps, some of that, just thinking about things like, this is your bundle of rights. How do you want to dispose of it if you do, or how you want to tag people along in your bundle of rights, what parts you want to give to other people. You are in control, so you can decide what you do with it. Don't give it all away just because somebody says, well, I got the connections and I got the capital. Well, you work for me. So
ask those questions. As founders, we should always be in that perpetual state of being student and teacher and leader and follower all at the same time, right?
I think it's so important. You have to be a lifelong learner, but at the same time, when it's business, then you're the leader, you're in control, and it's so many different hats you have to wear. But the more you do it, the better you get at it. I think there's nothing like experience and practicing this stuff. So
now, I want to take it down a different direction, because a lot of what we do in the breakout room is we explore things from different lenses. And at the very beginning, you mentioned about cars, and the cars were not really designed for women or by women. And there is an amazing, well, we've kind of heard it in a number of different angles, but Carolyn Criado Perez, which is an amazing author and an insightful podcaster as well, author of Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men, and I'll share that in the show notes, but also Visible Women, which is her podcast, and I'm going to share that in the chat here for anybody that's participating here, but in the show notes as well. But one of the things that she talks about here is that cars are not safe for women because they were designed for tall men, medium-sized men, and small men with boobs. So, and what that means is that the crash test dummies that are being used to test the safety and security of vehicles are not anatomically correct for keeping women safe. So things like seatbelt and seatbelt designs, they would actually, because they don't sit on our pelvis properly, when we're in an accident, it will slip up and get into our abdomen and actually push all of our insides back to our spine. Also,
wow.
I don't know about you, but when you're sitting in a car, I know me and my daughters, whatever cars that we're in, the seatbelt sits us right here on our neck.
You're constantly pulling out,
right?
yeah.
And you're like, if I were in an accident, I know this would cut me and cause damage on my neck. So just test it out yourself. But all cars are designed in this manner. So how do we use the power of IP and our voices, right? Because it's not the way it's set up now. What do we do leaving this podcast to affect change in a manner that product, services, algorithmic bias will bring that down into it? So algorithms as well. What do we do to create power through IP that opens up design to be from all these different lenses, so that things are no longer universally designed, but designed for different types of people, to protect all people, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just the car that's designed unsafe, but so what can we do to open up design to almost enforce what standards should we put in place?
No, that's a great question. And I'm thinking from an IP, from an IP perspective, a lot of it is looking at whatever right of IP, it's about protecting your creations, right? So the step number one here is identify the problems you see around you. right? I mean, take a notebook and write about all these problems, and then thinking about how you can solve these problems in innovative ways. I think that's a very legit problem. If it's not something that's a seatbelt is not meant for a female anatomy, or it's not safe for us, then well, there is a problem. What is the solution? Maybe a new seatbelt design. And it's solving a very legit problem for a 50% of the population, this world. And
how do we change it so that, as opposed to just saying, here's the problem, because there's so many people, majority of people don't realize that cars are unsafe for women. They didn't realize, because we're talking about universal safety standards that don't involve women. So when you use the vernacular that implies that everybody is thought of, including down to medical patents that are designed to be universal. I like to kind of bring in the cardio health side of things as well. So radiation of pain up and down the left arm, the crushing sensation in the chest, universal signs and symptoms of a heart attack that do not apply to women at all, right?
Yeah.
So how do we then, what can we do to build a standard in place so that when somebody goes for a patent, that it can also be said, great, you have a patent for men, for white men. Have you also considered how your patent will keep women safe, or people with hearing impairment safe, or like, is there a way to build out a universal standard that has, at the startup level or at the patent level, going, you need to think on a broader sense. It's not just this element. What are you putting in place to look at it from these different perspectives?
No, that's a great thought. And it's it's funny, in the field of IP, there is no room for, or at least the way the legislation is right now, it doesn't, the test is simple. If you want to get a patent, it has to be a new idea, has to be innovative, and has to have utility, has to be useful. Now, whether it's useful for the entire population or a subset of the population is not mentioned. And it's not one of the requirements. But where there is flexibility is in the fact that if somebody is thinking from just one perspective and they are getting a patent for that innovation, I think that still leaves a room open for other innovation, for other sort of disadvantaged groups that are not benefiting from that product, and sort of doing your own creation and innovation and R&D, and then being able to protect those new inventions, because now they're solving a different problem and they're helping a different subset of people, and there's likely going to be design changes to your seatbelt, for example, or to the medication. It's going to have different chemicals compositions and things like that. So all of those creations, like all of that innovation, should be out there. Creations should be out there, and then there is room for protection.
Is there an ethical
yeah,
is it should there be something in place where, when you apply for the patent, whether it's medical or mechanical, whatever it might be, to say that this has been, this is a medical patent that only apply, or a patent that only applies to this gender, and we have not, because some of these patents that we apply for, they do require testing and proof, right? So
I wonder if
it only needs to be done for this person, and to say that it's not a universal design and it has not been tested in this environment.
No, that's you know what, I'm now that talking to you, thinking, I haven't had a chance to think much about it, because it doesn't usually come up, but it's a very legit concern. I mean, it clearly affects a lot of us. But I wonder, perhaps a better place for, like, patent documents go in this database that people may or may not ever. How many of you have picked up a patent and looked at it just for the sake of it? It doesn't happen. But maybe there is room for legislation where during advertisement of some of these vehicles, there should be some sort of information posted that says, here, if you want to learn more about whether it's safe for you or not. Like, here's where we have tested this thing. Here's the data that we have found, and here's where we have not gone. So we
Only
haven't even
test
looked at, yeah,
environment. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So there is certainly, I think it is important, and this kind of information should be available easily. It should be, accessible to whoever wants to look it up. We shouldn't have to call or get legal ways of getting involved and calling companies and getting them to through discovery or something to get all the documents to find out more about it. I think some of this stuff is basic, like even food that we consume, right? And like, what is good for you, not good for you, how much sugar there is, what's going on. All of that data should be given to consumers so that they are informed and they can make more informed decisions. I can't see how currently the way legislation works, IP could be sort of a vehicle for that kind of a reform, because even ethical versus unethical, like, first of all, there's such a huge debate, as you can imagine. It's like, if we're talking about gun shells or some innovation in the gun technology, is that ethical or unethical? Like, it depends on who you ask. So there could be a lot of muddying of the waters and inconsistency or no consensus that could be the result of in implementing some of the
Well, it's not necessarily
broader ethical and ethical discussion.
Yeah,
but when
I
it comes to awareness and data, like, I think it should be out there. I agree with you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's down to function, right? Because if you example, with the car, if you have a patent that says this is a universal design, without disclosing the idea that it had not been tested, safety
yeah,
test, which is in order to put these on the road, globally, you have to adhere to this standard, right? So it's about being able to capture those inequities
yeah,
as a part of the patent process. And I'm just wondering, because I mean, already there's that disconnect with universal IP, right? We have to apply for IP in Canada, and then in the US, and then in all the different places in, oh my gosh, how many different places
yep.
in order to get, and there is no universal, there is no global IP either. So that's, at the same time that that's being addressed, and there's and that's a big problem on its own, because it becomes that money grabbing thing, especially from the European side. You can pay upwards of $100,000 on just trying to acquire that whole. I think the most I've seen, and this was a clean tech I was with, I think there was they got up to 65,000 before they stopped on European patents and so forth.
Yep.
So that is a whole other kind of subset of this discussion, is that I think that the IP industry needs, and it's going through that wonderful evolution of change as we start to build out this global economy and this global thought process. And I'm wondering if at the same time, if that equitability component might have a seat at the table to be able to build out, rather than when we say universal design, it becomes you need to address the other 51% of the human population in your design if you're talking about it from a safety standpoint. But interesting times in IP.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to think about. There's certainly cost is just going to your first point of it's been a deterrent for many people to figure out what to do with, like, have a great idea. Now what do I have to cop off all this money to get patent protection or whatnot? But it's not all that bad. The thing is, we're dictated by legislation, right? So a lot of changes will have to be made at so the legislative bodies, so sort of there, and us as lawyers or agents, we work with what's set out for us, and try to do the best job we can there, and help out as much as we can. But I would say, don't let cost be just a complete deterrent, so you don't even go and get some free advice or get out there and ask questions, because there are ways to manage that cost. There are many firms that can do help you out in sort of cost effective and budget conscious manner, but at the same time, the risk of not doing anything upfront could be a lot costlier down the
Ask
road. So
questions. That's the biggest thing, is be curious, ask questions.
yeah,
That's the most important thing. And these incubators, these accelerators, they're all great avenues. And even I know that Verskin and Par, I've dealt with them in the past, number of companies ago, have been an amazing environment, very supportive as well. So definitely reach out, and I'll share those details in the show notes as well. This is an environment where, as founders and within the startup ecosystems, we should be curious. We should feel like we can accomplish anything. We should be that perpetual optimist, right? And I know, Reshika, I've learned so much in this conversation today with you, and I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us today. And you've definitely opened up a new lens for me and a new perspective for me, and I appreciate that. Again, provisional patents are not expensive. If you want to run that route, we'll maybe perhaps lead a couple of links to that. And please feel free to reach out to Reshika with more information. Just because I know that every patent agent has a very specific area that they go into. What is your unique area that you love, that you specialize in?
yeah, I deal with all sorts of inventions that are not life sciences. We have a whole other department in the firm with masters and PhD holders who deal with organic chemistry, pharmaceuticals, psychedelics, that kind of work. Outside of that, anything that has to do with electrical-based, computer-based, mechanical, chemical, clean tech, anything really, high-tech inventions, that is fair game for me and people like me to handle at the firm. So the good news is we're a firm of 80 professionals. People have expertise in high-tech patents, life sciences, there's litigation group, there's trademarks, copyright, data management, and there's a lot of other experts at the firm. So if there's something I can help out with, I will be, and I'm very good at identifying things that I don't have expertise in and making sure that we put together the right team for the clients so they are getting the best advice from the best people. So
Wonderful. And I know you're on LinkedIn. We'll share your LinkedIn connection on in the show notes as well to reach out to you. Again, thank you so much. This has been so informative. I always end the show the same way because it kept me going. When I was young, I lived right around the corner from my school, and on the way home from school, I saw my friend way up in front of me, and I ran down after her going, "Hilda, Hilda, 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 Hilda." And I got up and realized it wasn't her, so I kept running and waving around the corner, "Hilda, Hilda, Hilda, Hilda." So for any founders out there who are feeling, or investors out there that are feeling overwhelmed, just keep running and waving. Have an amazing evening, and thank you so much again.
Thanks, Cindy. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye.